Good afternoon, Irish fans, and welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. I'm the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And we are going to continue our off-season previews of the various positions, and we're back to defense. And today, Brian, we are going to talk linebackers. And this is the first position breakdown that we will do about a group that does not have a coach yet. and we are still waiting for that to matriculate, and that it appears as though that will probably be the next defensive coordinator. We don't know who that is either, obviously, but you did have a little bit of intel on that on the board earlier.
Yeah, so obviously we don't know who the linebackers coach is going to be. We don't know if it's going to be Brian Mason. We don't know if it's going to be Chris O'Leary. We don't know if it's going to be the new defensive coordinator. We don't know if Marcus Freeman's going to coach that position. You know, because Nick Saban coached corners for a long time at Alabama. Yeah. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think Coach Freeman has decided definitively how this is going to go, which is why he's not in any kind of rush to make this decision, which is a benefit of the fact that there's the early signing period. Notre Dame's class is done on defense. There's no rush to get a decision made so that guys, signing in a couple weeks in February as part of the regular signing period, know who their coach is going to be. And at the end of the day, whoever the linebacker coach is, there's a dude right down the hall in the head coaching office who's going to be able to, provide assistance and all those type of things. So the intel we have today, and it's on the message board, I'm not going to get into names, but because that's what the premium message board is for. Right. And you can see the link to it down below, boards at irishbreakdown.com. But there's been a lot of names thrown out for the D coordinator search. I'm pretty confident that it's down to 4 based on the people I talked to today. So I list the 4 candidates and, just a little bit of a background on them. And then I'm going to do profiles of each candidate over the next few days, because I do not see this one being wrapped up soon.
You've got time to do a profile on each one.
It could, right? It could. I think it's a situation where when Coach Freeman's like, that's my guy, he's going to make a decision. Mm-hmm. But I think there's some guys that they've talked to that they'd like to get in for more formal sit downs. And look, you got to understand, this is his baby, meaning if I'm a head coach, right, the quarterback and receiver positions are going to have to really impress me, because those are the ones I'm going to have the highest standard for, because those are my positions.
Sure.
Right. Yep. Marcus Freeman was the DC and the linebacker coach. So if you're going to hire someone, like, this is the one you're going to be the most picky about. And so I think that's kind of something that, we're going to look at. And I've actually advocated, and I've made this, comment to some people at Notre Dame, like, I'd like to see Marcus Freeman be the D coordinator. And we see this: Keegan McLaughlin, Marcus Freeman for DC, and Nick L for linebacker coach. Why overcomplicate this? It's not about overcomplicating it. It's Marcus Freeman wants to be the head coach.
Right.
He wants someone else to be the defensive coordinator. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that he is going to have his hand in the defense, but he wants to hire someone that can oversee the day-to-day and call the plays and do all those type of things. I think he wants to be the head coach.
Right.
I think also the more he has to run the defense, the less time there is for him to recruit the entire board. And I think that's one of the areas where he wants to really take a big focus. And so as long as that there's a candidate out there that he trusts to do the job, he wants to hire an actual defensive coordinator. It's just that his standard is really high because of you're replacing him.
Right. And there's caveats too for whoever the defensive coordinator is going to be, as far as scheme and, coaching.
Because he wants the defense to be a certain way.
Right. Exactly.
Now, doesn't mean you have to call plays exactly like I did, or, but it's more of a, hey, we're not. And this is why Derek Mason fizzled as a candidate, right? Because Derek Mason was a guy that a lot of people were throwing out there early. And Vince, you and I talked about that. And, I was very skeptical of that one from the minute I heard it, because I don't see Marcus Freeman going out and getting a two-gapping 3-4 defensive coach, which is what Derek Mason is.
Right.
Derek Mason's an excellent defensive mind. He just doesn't fit at Notre Dame. which is why he fizzled as a candidate. And you haven't heard me hardly mention his name at all, as other people were mentioning his name. There were some other guys that kind of were on the list that other people had talked about. And I'm like, yeah, that guy doesn't really fit into what Marcus Freeman is doing. I think the coaches that he's narrowed it down to more fit what he's trying to do philosophically, more so than like alignment wise, but philosophically.
Right.
And then of course, you've got to be on board for the staff that I've put in place from a Marcus Freeman standpoint. And so the people that are going to be the coach, the defensive coordinator is going to accept that. And they're, as we learned with John Haycock, some guys that Marcus Freeman liked weren't willing to accept that. And that's fine. Move on from them, because he's not going to overhaul his staff. And I think whoever steps into that position is getting a pretty darn staff, in my opinion.
Agreed.
With Al Washington, Mike Mickens, and Chris O'Leary, plus special teams coach Brian Mason, who we haven't talked a lot about.
Right, because we don't know what his potential.
Well, we know what he's going to do as a special teams coach, but we haven't spent a lot of time on special teams. But the interesting thing about him is he coached basically the Rover position. I think they called him something like shooters or something like that. Like, I forget what the name of the position was, but he coached basically the Rovers in the Cincinnati defense. So he's the guy that can help out with that as well.
I not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I like that option, to be honest with you. I like having him coach the Rovers.
I agree.
Because I never really liked the fact
it's about maximizing your staff.
And that's exactly right. I never really liked the fact that Brian Polian was only the special teams coordinator, and he would come in, do his thing for 5 seconds, and then go away. You know what I mean? Like, it just didn't feel like he was being maximized as a coach. And regardless of what we think of him as a coach, it was more of I felt like he could be and should be doing more. And I like the fact that that's a
I don't think he could.
Well,
I think he should be doing more. I don't think he could. Okay. He's never been anything but a special teams coach.
That's true. That's always been his thing. That's absolutely accurate. But I think that it's a twofold thing. Number one, it's good for the special teams coach to be doing something extra. And number two, it takes a little bit off the plate of the potential defensive coordinator / linebackers coach. It's one less thing for him to worry about from a position standpoint, right?
And I think it adds more to the overall defensive coaching staff. I mean,
Agreed.
If you look at the makeup of Brian Kelly's staff, for example, you had a special teams coach, you had 4 defensive coaches, and you had 5 offensive coaches.
Right.
And then Kelly working mostly an offensive guy, you really had 6 offensive coaches. Right. You had 6, 4, and 1. Whereas with Marcus Freeman, you're kind of going to have 5, 5, and 1 if Brian Mason works with the linebackers in some capacity. And
the very worst to be 6 and 5.
5, 6, and 1, because Freeman will be more involved with the defense than he is going to be for the offense. So I like that. I mean, you're not losing anything from the offense.
Right.
You're adding more to the defense, which is what I like. Now, again, we're not saying that's what's going to happen. We don't know, but that's what I'm hoping happens.
Exactly.
And that affects the linebacker position, which is what we've talked about. And so the interesting thing is of the 4 candidates that I'm confident it's kind of down to, the finalists for the D coordinator job, one of them's never coached linebackers.
That's right.
Which is interesting. And some people say, well, it's clearly not going to be him. But, Vince, you and I, you know this. If you can coach safeties and corners and D-line, you can coach linebackers.
Sure.
I mean, as I've explained, I played quarterback my whole life. I played receiver for 1 year in college as a freshman. And my first year of coaching, I was a running backs coach, coached an All-American. We had the best season in school history, went to the national playoffs. He was an All-American, set a bunch of team records, right? Next year, I go coach receivers. I played receiver for 6 games in college. That's basically it. And 3 games in high school. That's it. I was a quarterback, coached all 3 of my starters were all conference. We won a national championship. We said, we passed for a ton of yards, blah, 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 right? If you know the game, you know the game. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that coaches in their 30s and 40s at the D1 level probably know more about the game than I did at 23 and 24.
Sure.
You get my point?
Yeah.
Like, if you can coach safeties, like Mike Elko has always been a safeties coach, right? You don't think Mike Elko could easily go coach linebackers tomorrow? Of course he could. So I wouldn't get too hung up on when I start releasing the candidates, well, that guy's never coached linebackers. Trust me, he's going to be fine. Plus, as I said before, there's a dude down the hall in the head coach's office who can certainly help you adapt to coaching linebackers. So that won't be a problem at all. He's going to pick the best candidate for that defensive coordinator position and go with that. So that obviously is going to affect the linebacker group because right now that group,
they have no
their position coach right now is Marcus Freeman.
Correct.
I mean, right now until he hires somebody, he's going to be working with that. And so
they're in good hands, but
they're fine. And we're not in a position yet. And this is the reason Marcus Freeman, there's no reason for Marcus Freeman to rush this hire.
Exactly.
The reason these hires used to have to get rushed in the past is because you had the February signing day and you had to get your staff in order before the February signing day. Well, Notre Dame signed their whole defensive class. They're not recruiting any more defensive players. There's a defensive player that they just kind of talked to yesterday that's got an offer, but it's a preferred walk-on spot as a linebacker in the 2022 class. So it's not a scholarship situation. And that's just kind of where they are. So the linebacker position will be fine. They don't start spring camp until March. As long as you've got a guy in place by the middle of February, you're fine. There's no need to rush this one.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Absolutely agree. And I like the fact that he's taking his time and doing his due diligence. And I don't think I'm giving too much away, as one of the 4 candidates is also a current NFL coach, and so his team's playing. I mean,
which wouldn't, I mean, like,
it's part of it.
Somebody on the message board made this point. Like, Brian Kelly hired Matt House as his defensive coordinator. He's still the Chiefs linebackers coach.
True.
He hasn't left. I mean, it's not just that. Like, a lot of people are like, well, it's going to be the NFL guy because his team's still playing and why. No, not necessarily. I'm just telling you that's not why this is taking time, because there's nothing keeping an NFL coach from accepting a job
interview?
And then
interview. Okay.
Yeah, because what they do is like there's a window before the playoff starts where you can interview. Like the Packers OC and quarterbacks coach have both interviewed for the Broncos head coaching job.
Gotcha.
So there's windows where you can do that. They allow you to do that. And as I said, Brian Kelly hired the Chiefs linebackers coach to be his new defensive coordinator. He named him weeks ago, and the Chiefs are obviously still in the playoffs.
Obviously, yeah, right.
So I know people want to try to, connect the dots. I can say with 100% certainty, 99.9% certainty, that Marcus Freeman has not made a decision. And barring him just waking up one of these next few days and just being like, you know what, that's my guy, he is doing his due diligence. And I'm not surprised that this is the job that's taking the longest to fill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, again, you got to think about who's doing the hiring. It's the guy. You're replacing me. The standard is high. You know what I mean?
I'm glad that it is. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I like the fact he's taking some time to do this because he has it. Use it. You know, and it's not like you're coaching up your guys right now. There's really nothing that you can do on the field. I mean, you can send video and you can do some things like that, but there's no point in rushing it.
Right.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting that there's been a lot of this discussion. Like Joe Uribe said, as a fan, I'd rather have a 4-down defense. It seems like those type of defenses have a better chance of stopping teams like Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson. It is kind of interesting that the team that won the national championship just now is a 3-down defense. And Alabama technically is a 3-down defense. So it's with anything. I don't care what style of defense you run. Just run the style that you believe in as a coach, that you can coach. I'm personally a 4-down guy, but I just think sometimes we overemphasize 3-down versus 4-down. There are both of those emphases in the finalists that I put on the board. So you're going to want to check that out. If you're not a member of the message board, you're going to definitely going to want to check that out in regards to, like I said, we've named the 4 guys that we believe based on the intel that I got today, and it's pretty good intel. I'm pretty confident in it that this is the 4 that they're zeroing in on. And so the DC will come from this group of 4. So you're going to want to check that out. But this is a linebacker show.
Yes,
so we've set the stage for what the biggest question mark is about linebacker, which is the position coach. But Vince, there obviously are a lot of other questions, and that's what we're going to kind of dive into.
Well, and I think the biggest question is, okay, you've got one guy leaving, right? The linebacking core, and Drew White. He's leaving to go to the next.
Well, of the starters,
that's what I was referring to. Yep, he's leaving to move on to whatever's next for him. And so you've got all this, what we think is great talent on the depth chart at linebacker. You had a major injury going into the preseason of what was a starter, right?
2 potential starters. Shane
Yep.
Simon also got hurt.
That's a good point. And Shane Simon obviously has moved on as well.
To Pitt. And then Isaiah Pryor Rover also is gone.
Yes.
And Paul Mawala also got injured. He was going to be a part of the rotation.
He's transferring
because he wasn't invited. He wasn't offered a 5th year.
Gotcha.
And Isaiah Pryor was not offered a 6th year, my understanding is.
Gotcha.
So you lost 4 guys from the roster, but because of all the injuries you mentioned last year, Vince, a lot of other guys got opportunities.
Absolutely. And so now you're looking at, you've got the guys coming back that were starters, the guys that were injured are coming back as well, or one of the guys that was injured is coming back, and the depth. And so you've got what the present is at the linebacker position, and then you've got what the potential for the future at the linebacker position could be. There's
right, because there's 4 really talented guys that just showed up on campus. And that's the intriguing thing too. And we'll get to the freshmen, at the end of the show, but the linebacking core is getting a huge influx of talent compared to where it was last year.
No question.
Because it's not just the 4 freshmen, but I kind of count Marist Liufau as one of those guys. He didn't play so early in fall camp.
He didn't play it down, right?
You're adding 5 really talented players into this mix. And then, we'll get into, Prince Kollie. There's a lot of potential here. Somebody had made a comment, and I want to pull this up, Vince, because it's really appropriate to say. It's from Alan English said this. He said, hey, all, it's safe to say that this position group has the greatest distance between its floor and ceiling for 2022 on the defense.
I like that.
I think that's spot on because there's so many question marks that I think the floor is pretty low at linebacker. We don't know if Marist Liufau can stay healthy. We don't know if, certain guys can play. We don't know what kind of jump Prince Kollie is going to make. Can the freshman help? Can Bo Bauer overcome the things that have kept him from getting into the starting lineup? Can JD I mean, there's so many question marks.
Sure.
Who's the flipping position coach going to be?
And that's
the
huge.
Floor is pretty low.
Yeah.
And unlike cornerback, there's not that proven commodity that you can at least rely on that guy to be a standout like you can with Cam Hart. So even though the other cornerback position's a question mark, you've got one solidified. It's safety. You've got the transfer coming in from Northwestern that is at least going to be a good player. There's a level of confidence in Ramon Henderson, right? So there's at least you kind of know what the floor is, and the floor at safety is going to at least be solid. It's going to at least be good, I think. Linebacker could end up being the biggest weakness on the team.
Could be.
It could also end up being a strength of the defense.
Absolutely.
And so to Alan's point, that's what makes this such a question mark in my view, Vince, is because there is such a huge gap in what we know and what it could be to what meaning if these questions don't get answered in the affirmative, this is going to look bad. And then compare it to what it could be if, boxes start getting checked. Marist gets back to full health and looks like the guy he was. Because, we interviewed Coach Freeman last year, and I'll share this now, because the season's over with and some guys have left. But, we talked for just briefly right afterwards just about the linebackers and who was looking good and all that. And this was right before Marist got hurt. And he was like, look, the guy with the most talent and upside in my room is Marist. Like, he's got more talent than anybody we have at the position.
Right.
And then a few weeks later is when he got hurt. So
look, we didn't get to see a ton of fall camp, but he was by far the star defensively. Again, outside of, Kyle Hamilton, but he was limited, I believe, in fall camp. He didn't do
Kyle was, he was coming off the ankle injury.
Right. So, Marist, anybody that watched those practices and walked away was like, okay, number 8's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that was obvious. And it was very disappointing when he got hurt with a season-ending injury.
Right.
Because I think he could have been something special.
Well, and again, that's a lot. That's kind of where we get into what Alan was saying earlier, Vince, which is we think he would have been special.
Sure.
We haven't seen him do it. And that's kind of where we get into the situation of we've got to find out what they will be because there's this wide gap. And so that's what's really interesting about it. And I think that's an easy transition into talking to specific about Marist, because that was kind of the first specific player you and I were going to talk about. Yeah, I think one of the things that limited this defense last year, and JD Bertrand did some really nice things at times last year. I mean, early in the season, he was the big storyline,
Sure.
because he went from being third string to being second string. He had beat out Shane Simon before Shane Simon got hurt. And then, of course, when Marist goes down, he steps into the lineup, makes a bunch of tackles early, really good against the run. And this is why you always say, like, we need to see how players do when teams get some film on them.
Sure.
Because what people started to do to JD was they started taking advantage of his aggressiveness, right? Because he tends to be a little too aggressive. And they started taking advantage of his lack of length. Well, that's not really that last part's not a problem with Marist, because Marist is going to be your fastest inside linebacker.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, he's your fastest guy. He's also probably your best cover linebacker. And he's really rangy. So some of the things that hurt you when you look at breaking down a guy like JD Bertrand, that lack of length that we talked about a couple weeks ago, that's not really an issue with Marist. You get far more range of the position, potentially. You have a guy that can close on the ball a lot more effectively. That's going to be much better. 6'3" with really long arms is going to be a much better weapon up the seam against tight ends than a 6-foot guy with kind of short arms. And that's exactly where Notre Dame was. So Marist coming back healthy and getting to his full potential is, to me, the biggest key for this defense. You could say I don't know if I'd say for the whole defense, but it's in the conversation for it. I mean, we could talk about big end and nose tackle in the second corner. Those are all important, so I don't want to get like hyperbolic and say this is the most important. It's certainly the most important thing for the linebacking core. It's in the conversation for the most important need on defense, for sure. And if Marist can be the guy we think he can be, but he hasn't proven he can be yet, then you get a big jump at the will linebacker position, and that's a very, very important, productive position in Marcus Freeman's defense. And I mean, we saw it last year, Vince. I mean, last year when you look at I believe JD Bertrand led Notre Dame in tackles last year, right? So I mean, that's clearly 101. The next closest person at 55. I mean, so that's a lot of tackles.
Wow.
JD Bertrand had more solo tackles than anyone else on the roster had total tackles. The will linebacker is in a position of prominence in this defense.
Right.
And they need someone that can be a little bit more consistent. And Marist can be that. And I honestly feel like if Marist can step up and seize hold of the will linebacker position, practically speaking, he adds more coverage ability, which then means you don't necessarily feel the need to have to play your Viper in coverage as much. I think that's part of the reason that they dropped their Viper into coverage as much last year, is because you didn't have good coverage. And this is the thing you and I talked about before the season. One of the concerns we had about the linebackers coming into the season was that they were short. Like when Marist went down, they're short and lacked length. How would that impact them in the pass game? And so you have to get that 6'5" rangy guy a little bit into the mix in coverage, because you don't necessarily love your coverage ability with your two inside linebackers, JD Bertrand and Drew White. If you can insert then a 6'3", long-armed, rangy, athletic kid like Marist Liufau, who started his high school career playing cornerback before he hit a growth spurt, now you've got a rangier, more coverage potential guy, a guy that can blitz, I think, more effectively. And now you don't necessarily need that boundary coverage presence as much from the Viper. That's my hope. Practically speaking, that makes sense. Now, it doesn't mean that's how it'll end up playing out, but like, to me, the better you are in coverage at will, the less, because the reason I'm saying the will and the Viper are always on the same side in the base defense. They're the boundary guys. And so I don't know if you want your Viper and your will both dropping into coverage a ton, and if you have
there'll be times schematically where that works, and you
drop your Viper and you insert your will on a blitz.
Right.
You may slant your D tackle outside, bring your will inside, and then drop your Viper into coverage, trying to get up underneath it, just a curl flat guy kind of thing. Take away a hitch, take away a stop route as best you can. So there's certainly some things you'll do, but you don't need to do it, hopefully, as much as they did it last year. that's going to be the key. So I think Marist stepping up and seizing hold of that position is important. And then we'll get into the depth. But here's the thing. If he comes out in the spring and is like, I got this, right? Like, this is my position. I think that then gives, plus the emergence of Prince Kollie, you've got some talented freshmen that are going to be, Jalen Snead can play Will. Josh Burnham can play Will. I even think Nolan Ziegler could play Will, although I don't think in 2022 he'll be there because he's coming in at like 205. He would need some time. But I think Jalen Snead and Josh Burnham and Prince Kollie, between the three of those, you're going to have depth at will to the point where now you can move J.D. Bertrand to Mike.
Yeah.
And let him battle Bo Bauer at Mike, which I think is a better fit for JD's skill set, and gives you a nice two. Because I don't think Bo Bauer is a guy that I necessarily feel has shown me enough from a consistency standpoint and execution of your assignment standpoint for me to say, yeah, it's Bo's turn, no question about it.
Yeah.
So one of the topics we're going to discuss, Vince, as we transition to that is who plays the mic. But I think what happens with Marist needs to be kind of figured out first. Is he healthy? Is he locked in mentally? Is he assignment correct? Is he back to being the guy that he was? Because if he's not, I think you got to leave JD there, at least in the spring. If Marist is healthy and ready to go, and he's full go in the spring, and mentally locked in and all that, then I think you can move I think you can move JD to the mic and let him battle there with Bo Bauer and Junior Tuihalamaka.
Yep.
Which are the three guys that I think there. So that's why Marist is
down.
Right. But that's why Marist is so important, Vince, because and you'll find this with a lot of things. In positions like this, it's not just the impact of that one position. A lot of times this, like we could say, like, if two or three guys emerge a corner, their emergence doesn't just impact the one corner spot. It could also impact safety because you can move Clarence Lewis. I mean, we always have those types of conversations. And so that's why, to me, Marist stepping up doesn't just help them in regards to, hey, you're now more athletic or ranger at will, but I think it makes your mic position better. I think for two reasons. One is you can move JD there, and two, you now have a ranger athlete there at will to kind of help protect the mic a little bit. So maybe you can be a little bit more aggressive with your mic, doing some pressures because you can protect him with at the safety level and with your will.
Yeah.
So I think all those things are why Marist Liufau emerging this offseason is a really important thing for this defense. And if he doesn't, it's a problem. If he does, I think the defense gets a huge injection in multiple places. Because like I said, I think it infects the Viper, how you use the Viper, and it impacts who's going to be battling at Mike. And those are two very, very important things. So that's why I think getting Marist back healthy is a very important piece to this Notre Dame defense heading into 2022. And hopefully he's healthy enough for the spring. That's the key.
Absolutely.
I think he needs those spring reps to get back into the football shape. And that way, when summer and fall camp comes, he's good to go and he's ready to rock and roll.
I mean, you're literally bringing, in my opinion, I think you're bringing in the most all around, the best linebacker potentially that was injured all season. And now he gets a chance, hopefully, to play. And that's a huge injection. And then there, like you said, there's the domino effect that if he's going to be the starter, what does that do for everybody else? And I think JD made a case last season that he needs to be on the field. I mean, you can't double up the next closest guy in tackles by accident.
He played poorly in the last game, and that's what
agreed.
I mean, how you finish is kind of that's the vibe you leave people in the offseason.
Sure.
But again, we can't dismiss the fact that in his first year as a starter, he had 101 tackles and 7 tackles for loss.
Yeah.
Led the team in one, was second on the team in the other. You can't dismiss that. There were some very good moments for JD.
Yes.
He made some first-year starter mistakes, but also I don't think in this defense he's a natural will. I think that lack of length hurts you more at will than it does Mike. Like, Drew White rarely got in trouble because of his lack of length. At times he would get engulfed by blockers because he just wasn't a real big guy. That's going to be an issue for JD at times, but I think JD has more natural power than Drew does. I think he's stronger than Drew was. At least his hands are stronger. And so I think you kind of have that same issue at two spots. If you move JD to Mike, you really only have it in one spot. And then you've got a little bit more of a rotation because JD's not going to be on the field necessarily. Even if he wins the Mike job, he won't be on the field quite as much as he was last year because last year JD didn't really have anybody to rotate in with him. I mean, there really was no number 2 Will.
Agreed.
And now you move him to Mike, and I think that there will be a rotation with him and Bo Bauer.
You can potentially keep Bo in the same role that he's been the last 2 years.
Right. Because Bo's going to play. It's
of
just
course.
is
he wouldn't have been asked back. He wouldn't have been asked back if he wasn't going to play. So I mean, it's understood that Bo's going to play, but I also don't think that he was promised the starting position either. I mean,
he definitely wasn't that. I mean, he understands that. But last year, JD Bertrand played 242 more snaps than Drew White, according to Pro Football Focus. I think if you can get in, so Drew White played 511, Bo Bauer played 354, and then some of Bo's snaps were on third down in the nickel, right?
Right.
So
does that count special teams too, or is
that just defense?
Okay, gotcha.
And so you kind of take some of Bo may get more snaps of Mike. JD's going to get less snaps, but I think that makes JD better. So as we look at the Mike position, less wear. The smaller you are at a power position, the more volume wears you down, right? Well, JD's not a big guy. If you can take 100 to 150 snaps off his body of work, I think that's going to make him even better because he's not going to wear down. I think he can play a little bit more disciplined, in my opinion, at Mike than he will because you've condensed the area he has to cover. The Will has to cover more ground than the Mike does, which I think helps JD, be more of a downhill guy.
Sure. And
then now you just got to work on cleaning up some of the tackling issues he had, right? But I mean, JD's missed tackles a lot of times, like in the backfield. If he would get better tackling, he's going to have 110 plus tackles. He's going to have 10 tackles for loss, and we're talking about, holy moly, this kid's got a chance to be a really, really good football player.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he's got to clean that up, though.
No question. And those are the things that people are going to remember, though. That they a lot of times people aren't remembering the 100+ tackles; they're remembering the missed tackles.
Right.
And I get it.
And the struggles in coverage against Cincinnati and North Carolina.
I understand it. I mean that's what people remember. People don't remember Cam Hart being a really good corner because he wasn't tested and he wasn't beat. You know what I mean? So
some people do, right? But I get your point.
But you see what I'm saying. And I think that's a lot of what has to do with JD. I think he was super consistent for a really long time, but there were times that he struggled. And some of those times
teams got film on him, the more they could take advantage of him.
And a lot of those times it was in the open field where all eyes were on him.
Right. Or like in the backfield as well.
That's what I'm saying.
And I think as a Mike, you can protect him a little bit more in those areas. And so that's why I look at it. So, I mean, I look at it like, boy, a combination of JD Bertrand and Bo Bauer, to me, both a year older, is a bigger, more athletic duo than what you just had.
Agreed.
And I think a more productive duo than what you just had. Because you had to protect – you couldn't play Drew a ton because he is a smaller guy, and I think he's a guy that had a lot of injuries early in his career. I think Drew White had a really nice career at Notre Dame. Really nice career. And Drew was a solid player on some pretty good defense.
Absolutely.
It's just when you got into the Bamas, when you got into the Cincinnatis, when you got into the Clemsons at times, like Drew just that was just a step above where he was, in my opinion. But even then, he tipped that ball against Clemson last year early in the ACC title game that, lets Kyle Hamilton pick it off. But then there were some issues where he kind of got caught up in the trash on some of those long runs. And
that would be that would be my biggest gripe about Drew, is that he would get caught up in the wash a lot
because he was so short. His arms are so short that he just couldn't block destruct against at times the way you need him to. I mean, there were times against Bama where he got to where he needed to get to. It's like I remember the long run by Najee Harris in the Rose Bowl last year. I mean, Drew. I mean, it's called perfectly. The D line gets great push. Have to bounce the run. Drew's scraping. He knows where to go, but he hits that lineman, and he just couldn't. That guy was so long, he just kind of got on Drew's body, and Drew couldn't get him off.
Right.
And Najee bounces outside. A faster linebacker beats that lineman to the spot. A longer linebacker gets off that block, and it's at best a 3 to 4 yard gain.
Right.
Instead, it's a 40-yard gain. So those are the areas where I think, you want to see some improvement being made. And I think getting I don't think Notre Dame lacked athleticism last year, but I think the combination of athleticism and length issues, like the length, like Drew White's a good athlete. He's not an elite athlete by any stretch, but you can't be a good athlete and short.
Sure.
If you're going to be short, you got to be an elite athlete.
Right.
And I don't think that wasn't Drew, who did a lot of good things in Notre Dame. I mean, Drew did a lot of good things in Notre Dame. Captain, great kid, overcame a ton of adversity during his career, did some really nice things at Notre Dame. But it just, look, this is about competing for championships, right? And to me, that's where you've just got to get a little bit better there. I don't know if Bo Bauer and JD Bertrand are that duo, but I think it gets them closer.
Right.
In 2022.
I think that might be the duo for this year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think
right.
moving forward, as some of these guys get a little bit more experience and things, maybe you find some guys that have more of that length, have more of that athleticism. And I totally get that. But I think for 22, as I sit here today on January 20th, in my head, I'm thinking your best bet at Mike this year is Bo
of what we know.
and JD. Of what we know.
In
That's
the back of your
right.
mind, you're saying, man, I hope Junior can beat these guys out. Or, man, I hope Burnham can beat these guys out. Because those are the guys with the really high ceilings. I mean, look, Junior is going to be bigger than Bo Bauer or JD Bertrand the second he steps foot on campus, which was last week.
Crazy.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Josh Burnham, by the time his freshman year arrives, is probably going to be way more than Bo Bauer.
Yeah.
And the phrase that the phrase I'm going to use for him. Guy's a flipping pterodactyl. I mean, I even a guy from Georgia that I know covers Georgia who tends to always underrate Notre Dame. He just thinks any kid that's not from the South or isn't going to the SEC sucks.
Of course.
That's just how this guy is. Good guy. But first thing he's like, dude, this Burnham kid is a freak. Right? Like, I'm like, okay, wow. Like, coming from you, that says something, because and he has no problem telling me that Notre Dame sucks. And I mean, he's not some guy that's like trying to tell me something to make me happy. He has no problem telling me that everyone at Notre Dame sucks. And, so for him to be like, dude, this Burnham guy is a freak. I mean, that, lengthwise, athletically, like, he's that first guy off the bus guy. This is what we've been telling people. Like, this kid's different. Well, they don't really have that. You know what I mean? And so that's in the back of your mind. You don't think Josh is going to be ready mechanically.
Right.
I don't know if Junior's going to be ready, but you're hoping they are, because that's the future of Mike, is one of those two guys. Now, Josh can play Mike, Will, Viper. Josh can do a lot of things.
Sure.
For Burnham, it's going to be, he's going to play, where's Josh Burnham going to play? The position that gets him on the field the fastest.
Well, and that may be Will. If JD moves over to Mike.
Maybe Mike. That's what we don't know.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I think the backup Will could potentially be a wide open spot.
Yes, but I think I'm talking more down the line as a start.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because the reality is Marist still has multiple. I mean, Marist, redshirted in 2019. 2020 was the COVID year. Marist was technically a redshirt freshman this year. So he still has 3 years of eligibility left. So he's not necessarily going anywhere.
Right.
So what I'm referring to, and the reason I'm talking about Josh as a Mike, is barring – now, if Marist gets hurt again, now it's Prince and Jalen and Josh Burnham are battling for the starting job at Will, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I wouldn't move JD back over. I'd keep him – Again, we don't know that JD's going to move to Mike.
We're speculating
This is
on
us
that. Yeah,
speculating, right?
Yeah,
this is what we think that they should do. I have a feel – I wouldn't be shocked if JD starts at Will in the spring just to give Marist time to get caught back up. But honestly, I just would make the move now and put JD at Mike and say, Marist, we're going to get you. But then that opens up more. If you move him now,
right,
you can't give Marist all those reps because he's still coming back from an injury, which means Prince Kollie's going to get more reps, which means Burnham and Jalen Snead are going to get more reps. And to me, that's why I would do it right now. But I think that if they move JD it's going to take moderate level of, normal improvement for him and Bo Bauer, just moderate improvement that you make from one year to the next, normal next year level improvement to make this, definitely a more productive, more physical, better run defending Mike lineup than what it was last year. That's my opinion. And that's a positive because you need to be better at Mike. And, Drew was good. Again, when we say better, we're talking about meaning beating the best of the best.
Sure.
Drew White was a good football player at Notre Dame. And I'm saying this because I'm hearing myself talk and I'm thinking, man, I'm sounding real super negative about Drew.
Yeah, it sounds like we're banging on Drew.
And it's not, because Drew's a good football player at Notre Dame.
Right.
But we're saying the standard is to win a championship.
Sure.
And I just don't think Drew was that guy. Drew was a good football player. He had almost about 200 tackles in his career, had 80 in 2019, had over 50 each of the last 2 years. I still remember him stepping in against Navy in 2018. Remember when Drew Tranquil got hurt? Drew White stepped in the mix, played really well that game. So I love Drew White. It's just, again, that standard for winning a championship, we saw from Drew against Oklahoma State, against Bama last year, against Clemson in the ACC title game. When he was playing against the best of the best, he just wasn't quite what you needed him to be. And that doesn't mean he wasn't a heck of a player and you don't love him and great leader and all that kind of stuff. It just means
football.
That's the standard at Notre Dame.
Analysis.
You need to have a Manti, a Jalen, an Owusu. You want those guys. You need those guys because that's what Bama's going to have. That's what Georgia's going to have. That's what Clemson's going to have. No, not Ohio State. Their linebacker play was pretty bad last year. They need work. They need work. They don't have the guys coming back that Notre Dame has. That's why they needed that freshman class. Anyway, so I just feel like that's going to be an upgrade at Mike. If Marist is healthy, it's an upgrade at will. There's the potential for the inside linebacker play to be much better this year than it was in 2021. And at the end of the day, Vince, they need it to be.
Well, you need
it has to be.
Exactly. Right. So let's shift the conversation just a little bit, and let's talk about Jack Kaiser. And, obviously he was kind of in a thankless spot of having to fill in for the Buckus Award winner. I mean, and anybody that expected him to be that was obviously, they're not going to get what you want at that point. So, but I had very high expectations for Jack going into this season. Not Butkus Award-winning expectations, realistic high expectations. And I think at times I was let down a little bit by his play. I don't think he was as consistent as he needed to be at that spot. And I hate to say it this way, but to me, that position's wide open going into the spring and the fall.
Who?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of talent.
To be wide open, who's there? I mean, that's my thing is who's going to play besides Jack Kaiser?
Because I think Prince Kollie has grown out of that position.
Right.
I think he's inside. Right. I mean, I don't think he's.
And we were hearing that last fall camp, that guy's not going to be at Rover very long.
Because I just think his body type now is not.
And you got Jalen Sneed potentially could play there. You've got Jordan Patelho could maybe play there, which I think he'll be battling there. That's the interesting thing. I'm interested to
see what they do with Jordan.
I have no clue where he's going to play.
Yeah.
But after that, you got freshmen because Moala's not back. Pryor's not back. With Jack, it's kind of interesting. I mean, the guy had 2 flipping touchdowns this year, had 2 pick sixes.
Yeah, you're right.
And so there were some moments where he looked really good. It just, to me, I expected him to be more active.
Yeah, right.
Consistently active.
He's just kind of there.
And he wasn't great in coverage like I had hoped he would be this year. And I think at times his lack of length played an issue. And I think part of it was just an overall lack of experience. I mean, he hasn't played a ton of football. And, when you're a second late reacting, it's not about being a second late in speed, but when you're a second late reacting, that's when a guy from, Oklahoma State's going to beat you up the seam for a big play. And I think that's kind of where Jack was this year is just, be more aggressive, be more assertive, be more determinative and get where you need to get to. Because, I mean, look, there's a reason they moved Jordan Patelho to Rover. There's a reason a lot of times this year we didn't see Jack Kaiser on the field. There's a reason they put Isaiah Pryor in at times because Jack wasn't able to do the whole thing, and that's where he needs to get to now this year if he wants to stay in the lineup because Jordan Botelho did some interesting things at Rover this year. And, there's an argument to be made that, maybe play him at Rover, and then when you want to take him off the field, you put in a nickel. Because if Xavier Watts plays at safety this year, you now find ways to get him, Ramon Henderson, Brandon Joseph, and the two veterans on the field together some way, somehow.
Yeah, I think he could play some Rover-ish type stuff.
Well, I don't know if I'd put Xavier Watts there, but somebody from the safety position needs to play there. I'm just saying if Xavier stays,
sure,
the overall depth at the position is such that you can do that. Maybe that's a role for DJ Brown. Get him closer to the line of scrimmage where he doesn't have to play as much in space. I mean, there's all types of things you could do there, but the point is he's got to play better if he wants to continue getting the reps. Because here's the thing for me, if Jack's not giving you more production and more consistency now that he'll be a senior, then as a coach, I'm like, well, look, then just let me play the young guy. Then just let me play Jalen. And I'll if I'm going to get beat, I'm going to get beat because a young guy makes a mistake, because I know I'm going to also get some big-time plays from him. So you go Botelho and Jalen Sneed, or Botelho and Jalen Sneed and Nolan Ziegler. If Jack doesn't step up and play better, he's going to have to play better. Now, I expect him to play better, but I think he needs a jump, not just a normal year 1 to year 2 improvement. I think he needs a jump. I think something that could help the whole position group is, I'm going to go back to what we talked about at the beginning. I think the way that Notre Dame plays defense, the one thing about the 4-2-5 is I think it can be a challenge for one coach to coach all three of those guys, because one guy is just out of the box, completely out of the box a lot of times.
Right.
And his eye discipline is different. What he's reading is different. His coverage responsibilities are different. How tied in he is to the corners and those type of things is so different that you almost say, maybe they do. Maybe if Brian Mason is a guy to coach that position, does that make the Rover position that much better? Because you have a guy that's training his eyes on that position,
on that one spot. Yeah.
Then if you have another, your D coordinator is your linebacker coach, his eyes are on the inside guy. And now Marcus Freeman can kind of step back and have his eyes on all of it. Because I promise you, when they get into the 2022 season, Marcus Freeman may want to be the head coach, but his eyes are naturally going to gravitate to that spot.
Absolutely.
It's the way it is. I mean, it's just your eyes are trained to see certain things.
No question.
And so there's going to be a lot more eyes. And that's where I think if they decide to have Brian Mason be involved in the defense, and that, I don't know if that's been decided or not yet. All the position move stuff and all the coaching stuff that we're talking about, like who working here, is our opinion. Our opinion. I wanted to make sure people understand we're not giving you insider secrets on this, because I don't know. Like, that's the least of my conversations right now with coaches, because I don't think they're not going to discern all that until they get a coach in place.
Right.
Right now, it's just winter conditioning and stuff like that. You don't have to make those decisions right
Exactly.
now. We're just projecting what we think, will be the best options for this team. And so I just want to make sure people understand that. So we don't know if JD Bertrand's going to move. We don't know if Brian Mason's going to coach. We're just kind of going over, at least that's an option now. And it's something that I would like to see from Notre Dame. And if they do that, then I think that's where you could really start to see a jump, is because in 2020 with Clark Lee was running the defense and coaching the inside backers, but he had Nick Lazinski helping on the inside backers, and Chris O'Leary was the Rovers coach in 2020, basically. I mean, Jeremiah Wusu credits Chris O'Leary for a lot of his development, because he just had that one guy. Mike Elko in his defense, if you remember, I think it was Tyler Santucci or something like that was the guy's name, but he had an analyst and a GA that just worked with the Rover position. So we've seen this be effective before.
Right. It was just more behind the scenes than having an actual assistant coach be that guy.
Well, no, I mean, when it's a GA, that guy's on the field. I mean, I know Chris O'Leary was on the field.
I just meant an actual assistant coach. I'm not saying he wasn't on the
field.
Yeah,
but I think that nowadays, the way GAs are now, they're not like they were 20 years ago, where they're not real coaches, or they're just getting donuts and coffee for the real coaches,
Gotcha.
You're hiring guys now that need to be able to coach. I mean, we've seen it from Harry Heastand for years. I mean, Harry would let his GAs coach a side of the field when they would do those half-field runs. So what that is, you have a center, guard, to tackle on one side, like a center right guard, right tackle on one side of the field. You have a center, left guard, and left tackle on the other, and they're half-field runs. So you're just running run plays to that side. As soon as that snap is over, you're going to this side. Then you got to restack, and
I love
it's
that
just getting
drill,
reps
by the way.
in.
When you got
But
the numbers, I love it.
Harry's working on one side, and he's got his GA on the other side. Now, he would kind of watch both, but he made sure that he had a GA in place that could help him, see that and coach that. And so you're seeing analysts and GAs be giving more and more responsibility, which means they're purposely trying to hire a higher quality of coach for that job. So that's why I think, like when Nick Lazinski was on the field, we've seen him. I mean, Clark Lee would just let him take the linebackers.
Right.
Mike Elko would let I got to remember that guy's name, but he let that guy just take the Rovers and work with them. And Clark Lee would take the insides when Mike Elko was the defensive coordinator. So I think that there is a lot of merit, especially if your hire is not a natural linebackers coach. Then I think that's where you could even see greater need if the defense, for it. But whoever the linebackers coach is going to be the D coordinator,
right?
And so I think there's value to having that there. Plus, if you're a Rover, you're going to be a special teams guy. So I think there's that relationship there too, where the special teams coach is going to be utilizing every linebacker on the roster for special teams. It'd be nice to kind of have that further relationship by his work with the defense. So anyway, that's just kind of my 2 cents. But I think that is something that could, whether it's Mason or a GA. I do know they're looking for a new GA on defense. I don't know if it's going to be a D-line guy, which it's been that you get 2 per side of the ball. I would imagine with 2 position coaches in the secondary, you're going to have one of the 2 GAs be a linebacker guy, one of them be a D-line guy. And
there were some questions earlier about Nick Lazinski. Is he still on the staff or did he go someplace else?
No, he's still on the staff. He was out on the road recruiting last week.
Okay.
I just don't know what role he's going to be.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I don't know if he's going to be, a GA, an analyst, on field, off field. I really don't have an answer to that.
Right. And is there a limit on how many years you're allowed to be a GA?
I think it's 3.
Okay.
I think it's 3. So I don't I'm not quite sure where he is in that regards. But I don't think he's going to be able to be an on-field guy as much this year. I think he's kind of spent up that if I'm just trying to remember correctly. I believe he had.
So there's one more guy that I want to talk about before we get to the freshmen, the incoming guys, and that's Prince Kollie. And we talked about how he kind of started out at Rover and he kind of grew physically out of that position to a degree and is moving inside. And he practiced at will pretty much the majority of last season. And whenever he saw playing time, it was at will. Do you think he stays at will, or do you think that there might be some movement in his future as well?
I think for the most part, Marist Liufau would be an exception. Bo Bauer would be an exception in the opposite direction. You're recruiting linebackers that you feel can play inside, meaning Mike or Will. There are going to always be Junior Tuihalamaka is an exception.
Sure.
Guys like Jalen Sneed, guys like Josh Burnham, guys like Prince Kollie, you're recruiting them because you think they can play all over. So with Prince Kollie, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be where can he get on the field the fastest? Well, if you look at the depth chart now, if Marist is a guy that's as good as you think he is, he may have that spot locked down for 3 years. You're just going to sit Prince Kollie for 3 years? So to me, it's going to be a lot like Burnham. It's going to be where can he get on the field the fastest? So if Prince Collie's sitting there behind Marist Liufau and you're like, this kid's one of our 3 best linebackers, you're going to cross-train him at Mike and Will.
Of course, yeah, right.
Like Notre Dame did, if you remember, in 2017 with Tavon Coney.
Yeah.
Niles Morgan and I believe Greer Martini were the starters, but Tavon would play both spots. Excuse me. So I think he's going to start at Will, but I think the more comfortable Prince gets, the more you may start to see him cross-train. But the fact is they got to get that kid on the field, and I think they want to get him on the field. I've heard a lot of good things about what they athletically, they love him. Strength-wise, they love him. It was just this is a kid that played running back. I mean, he as a junior in high school, he was a 1,000-yard receiver. As a senior in high school, he was a 1,000-yard running back, almost a 2,000-yard running back. and he just kind of played all over on defense. It was just like, be an athlete, go make a play.
Make plays, yeah.
A lot of it here, he had to learn a lot.
Sure.
And
high school.
it was amazing, Vince, watching him the first time he got on the field last year, and you're like, that guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
And then you kind of fast forward to the end of November, and then you watched him later in the year against like Georgia Tech and Stanford, and you're like, he's figuring it out. Like, he made a lot of improvement just from looking comfortable on the field last year.
Agreed.
From the first time we saw him to the last time we saw him. I'm curious to see what kind of jump he's going to make this offseason, because we talked about Marist and JD and Bo and the veterans that we know, but Prince is the kind of kid that could say, yeah, he was your most talented guy last year because I didn't know what I was doing. Now I'm the most talented guy. You know what I mean? And I, that's where I think it will get real interesting, is if Prince can have a breakout offseason. He's the kind of kid that says, I don't know where we're going to play him, but we got to play him somewhere because this kid's too good not to play. And that's what you hope Prince does, is like, look, yeah, Marist may be the starter, but we're going to have a 60-40 split snaps wise because I'm that good.
Right.
Or Marist is just so good we can't take him off the field, so maybe you have a freshman back him up. But hey, JD and Bo, you guys got somebody new in this battle with you. It may be that. I mean, that's the thing about Prince, is he's a pretty powerful kid for his size. Another year in the weight room, because I don't believe he was an early enrollee, right? I don't believe he was.
Right, yeah.
So this is his first full offseason in the weight room.
Right.
What kind of jump does he make? So I'm really curious to see kind of how he evolves, Vince, because he's another guy that I look at and say, he's somebody that has that talent that he could really shake some things up this offseason, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah, I think he's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And you're right. When he first got out on the field, it was like, man, he's not really ready to be out there from a mental standpoint and from a, feeling comfortable standpoint. But his maturation process, I think, was sped up in a good way. Like, I think he sped it up on his own. And by the end of the season, he looked like he belonged. And I think he's poised to take that next step. It just depends on where that next step is going to be and what it's going to look like. I think that's going to be key. And then who he's battling with, there are certain positions where that path is clear to the field.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And this is another big wild card is the reason we have not talked about James Laurinaitis is because I have no idea what his role is going to be.
He's a great player.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he's going to be a good coach. We don't know.
Well, it's not even that. Like, I have no doubt that he's eventually going to be good together. They've talked football together. He's not bringing him on, and he's not convincing James, a friend of his, to leave the career he's at now to come back.
He had a radio show and all kinds of other stuff. Yeah.
Right. If he doesn't think he can be a coach, it's just I don't know what role he's going to have in 2022.
Right.
Is he going to be more of an analyst role where he's doing future scouting? Is he going to be more of a self-scouting guy? Is he going to be working with the linebackers? I have no idea. What his role is going to be very interesting. Does he take a strength conditioning role? I don't know. And so I have to think in some way that James Laurinaitis is being groomed to eventually be a full-time coach.
I'm sure.
I don't, hey man, you want to be an analyst for the rest of your life? Like, I think there's that, which then leads to, okay, but if the defensive coordinator is a guy that can coach multiple positions, maybe he works with linebackers now, knowing that he's got film room help from a GA or an analyst plus James Laurinaitis, then he doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time guy. And then maybe, Chris O'Leary moves on in a year or two because he gets other opportunities and pay raises or D-coordinate. I mean, who knows what his opportunities are?
Sure.
Then that guy, someone can move to safety. I mean, there's so many different ways this can go, but he's gonna have a role too. One of the things I would do is I would say, hey, you're my freshman guy. You're in Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham's ears, teaching them the game of football. Because an analyst can be very involved with kids off the field. He can film room with them. He can do all those kind of things. He just can't coach on the field.
Right.
And that would be one of the things I'd say, look, man, you see this Burnham kid? He's like a longer, more athletic version of you. You see this Jalen Sneed kid? Like, this kid's special. This Junior Tualamaka, your role, number one, is to teach those kids what you know. You know what I mean? And I think that could be an impact. So I'm really curious to see how all of this plays out. Very, very curious to see how all that plays out.
So speaking of freshmen, there is a pretty solid group of freshmen, and we've kind of touched on it here and there, but let's wrap this thing up with talking about the freshmen. You've got 4 guys coming in, the number 1 linebacking core in the 2022 class, and they're all in class right now at Notre Dame, which I think is also huge. And so all 4 of those guys coming in, they're going to make an impact, whether it's an impact just to the depth chart alone, pushing guys, or whether they see the field a little bit this year. I think they're going to make an impact this year, I think, as a group.
There's no way they're not going to do something.
Right.
They're going to be involved some way, somehow. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be starters, depth guys, special teams. Don't know any of that. Don't know any of that. What I know is these kids were all told their entire recruitment, you better come in thinking you're going to play. They did not, because a lot of times with these, hey, look, you got to come in, you got to work hard, when your time comes. No, they each one, hey, don't come in here thinking you're going to redshirt. Don't come in here thinking, you need to come in here thinking you're going to battle. Because they want those guys pushing the veterans, number one. Number two, They know this kid's going to help us. I mean, if I'm Brian Mason, the first time somebody comes into me and says, should we redshirt Josh Burnham? I'm slapping him in the face and kicking him out of the meeting room, right? Unless it's Marcus Freeman, then I'm not doing that.
Yeah, right.
But I'm like, no, I'm not redshirt any of those guys, right? Those guys are all going to be starters for me on kickoff coverage and punt coverage and all that kind of stuff, because those guys can flat out
and
run.
If they're as good as we think they are, they're not going to be 5-year players anyway.
No, Nolan Ziegler's the only guy that I would even remotely have a conversation about redshirting, because he's physically behind the others. He's 205, that kind of thing. Nolan could be a 5-year guy. He's the only one, though. None of those other guys, if they're 5-year guys, it means they were hurt or they're not as good as you think they are.
Sure.
And by that point in time, you've over-recruited them anyway.
True.
And so, I'm giving them – they're going to play – if Junior Tuihalamaka is not starting on the kick return team next year, I'm going to be shocked. That fullback position, where you have the fullbacks or tight ends, I mean, he'll be on there. If Josh Burnham and Jalen Snead aren't starters on the kick coverage and punt coverage teams next year, I'm going to be shocked. So they're going to play. Now, the question is will they help you at linebacker? That's the bigger question, because it's not going to be easy for them to just shove Prince Kollie and Marist Liufau and Bo Bauer and J.D. Bertrand to the side. It's not going to be easy, but it's possible because of how good they are. And the other thing, too, is I'd have some fun with them in nickel. If Bo Bauer ends up being your starting Mike, I'm taking him off the nickel package and I'm putting Burnham or Jalen Snead or something like that in there, or Jordan Botelho. I would love to see Bo Bauer get replaced by Jordan Botelho in that. So that's going to be an interesting thing, is with Botelho emerging. Hopefully he has a smarter offseason than he did last year. With the incoming freshman, with Prince Kollie emerging, with Marist Liufau coming back, this is going to be a way longer, way deeper, and way more athletic linebacking core than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
Will the play get better? That's the question. Will the production get better? That's the question. But I can guarantee you the depth's going to be better, it's going to be longer, and it's going to be way more athletic than it was. Because, again, you remove Marist from this conversation. Prince wasn't as athletic because mentally he was still a freshman learning everything, and you don't play as fast. He's got that year under his belt now. So that's kind of where I'm really excited about this group, Vince, is it's going to end up being a question mark on the defense. But, man, if the light goes on for enough of these kids, they've got a chance to be really, really good. And that's when you start to kind of get excited about what this group can be. So we did have a super chat about the linebacking position here, Vince, from Zach Martin. Thank you for the super chat, Zach. Can you do your ideal, and Vince, I'm going to let you go first since you're going to have to leave here soon. Can you do your ideal perfect scenario 2 deep at the 3 linebacker positions for game 1 and game 12 with growth for underclassmen?
Wow.
I'm just going to do one, Vince. I'm just going to do one.
Exactly. So you said 2 deep, right? Okay.
Deep,
so at Will, I'm going Marist and Prince.
Mm-hmm.
At Mike, I'm going Bo and JD. And at Rover, I'm going Kaiser and then Snead.
So you're going Bo starting and JD coming off the bench?
Yes.
You love
filling
Bo
in.
Bauer. JD's been a better player than Bo so far in their careers.
As of right now.
Right. You're telling me right now Bo Bauer was a better player last year than JD Bertrand?
No, but I just don't know about him moving inside. That's all.
It's like the same position. I mean, the Mike and Will it's basically the same.
You don't have to do much to convince me. I think those two are equal right now.
Yeah,
but
I think JD's a better player than Bo Bauer right now. I mean, there's a reason why JD Bertrand played more than Bo Bauer last year.
For sure. Oh, there's no question. Yeah.
And Bo's a year older than JD. So that's the other thing, too. Bo's going to have to be a lot more disciplined if he's going to win a starting job. But I know you love you some Bo Bauer. I know.
I do.
I know you do. But they're both going to play.
Yeah, right.
At the end of the day, that's the thing. That's the same as mine. I mean, it's you said Kaiser and Patelho at Rover, right?
I said
I think it's
Sneed at Rover.
Jalen Sneed. So you have Jordan Patelho not in the 2 deep or playing somewhere else.
I didn't. I don't know where to put him.
I
just don't know where to put him. That's
as
where
of
I'm
right
at.
now. He's I think going to end up because Foskey's coming back. I think you're going to see Patelho be more of a Rover.
Okay.
I personally would like to see him. I'd put him a Mike and let him battle for the starting Mike job. That's just me.
Okay.
Like neither one of those JD or Bo or neither one of them are so good that I'm not putting another guy there. I think Jordan Patelho could be your most God-given, physically gifted linebacker on the roster. When you go pound for pound, a guy with his size he is a defensive end with the athleticism to play Rover.
Yeah, that's true.
What could he do at Mike? And he played inside linebacker in high school. That's what I would do. I'd give him a shot to win that job. Now the problem is it's a very undisciplined player.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want my Mike being a guy that's kind of had been in and out of the doghouse from a decision-making standpoint for much of his career. But my 2 deep, based on what we know right now, is going to be the same as yours inside, except I'm going to go JD1, Bo 2. I'm going to go Kaiser and Patelho at Rover. That's where it's going to be. As far as freshman growth, I just have got to see those guys play first in the Notre Dame uniform. I do think they will make an impact on the depth chart. I just don't know if it's going to be beating out a Patelho. Now, if Patelho moves to Viper or moves somewhere else, then I'm with you, Vince. I'm sliding Jalen Sneed in there. That's where the game 12 part of that could come, Zach, in regards to, Burnham being in the 2 deep now or Patel or Sneed. But, Prince Kollie was a top 100 player too coming out of high school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
Bo Bauer's a pretty highly ranked guy coming out of high school too. So I've just got to see those guys first before I, spend too much time projecting him into the 2 deep. But they're going to play this year some way, somehow. And there's no rule that says you can only play 2 at a time. You can only play 2. You can go 3 deep if there's a, and that's where I think the nickel package could be where maybe those guys get some playing time. Like, hey, we're going to go with these veterans in the base defense, but man, on 3rd down, we got to get Jalen Sneed in the game, or we got to get Josh Burnham in the game. We got to find a way to just let that guy go. And maybe that's where they find their niche. But they'll definitely be on special teams, and I'm looking forward to seeing him. And like we had a question, do you see Jalen Sneed starting? Someday. I don't think it's going to necessarily be this year, because he's probably going to be at the position if he's a will, like he says he's being recruited to play inside. If that's the case, beating out Prince Kollie and Marist Liufau is not going to be an easy thing to do. But Jalen Sneed's going to be on the field. And we were asked by Laker Irish as well. Jalen Sneed's going to play next year, barring injury, some way, somehow. I just don't know how much or where or those kind of things. So, that's sort of that unknown. We'll have to see,
Yep. All right. I got to leave it to you.
You're going to take us out of here, Vince. We're wrapped up. Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, thank everybody for joining us on this edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Make sure that you hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on a podcast, give us that 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. Also, the little bell on the YouTube side. Make sure you hit that, because you just never know when we might have a show. So for Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on Irish Breakdown Podcast.